An Alex Duval poker vlog? Could it be? It can be. I know you guys probably thought I was never going to post a vlog again, but here we are. I've been enjoying posting other types of content, as you have seen. Maybe you saw recently I posted a video about Garrett Adelstein's reaction to the whole Robbie J. Lou cheating scandal. That one did very well, has over 100,000 views. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But yeah, what's been going on with me? I mean, recently I was actually away. I was living in Colombia, the country, for about a month, practicing my Spanish, meeting some mamacitas, and playing online. I'll have some vlogs that come from that trip. I also went to Aruba before that, played some poker there. And then before Aruba, I was in Maryland, my hometown, my state where I'm originally from, and I played pretty much every day at the MGM there. And that is where the video I am posting today starts off. I made about $20,000 within a week and a half playing 2-5 at MGM, where the max buy-in is only $1,000. As you'll see from the videos I'm going to be posting here in the upcoming week, the games were just very good. And I obviously ran very well. So without further ado, let's get back into it. Hope you guys enjoy. Let's go. In the first hand of the night, we see a pretty one, Jack 10 of hearts, and raised to $15 under the gun. Under the gun 1, under the gun 2, middle position, and the big blind all make the call. The flop comes Jack 8, deuce 2 diamonds. Playing these multi-way pots out of position can be pretty weird. I decided to start with a bet for $35. I could also start with a check, but I think I'll often have the best hand and I need some protection. The under the gun 1 and under the gun 2 player make the call. The turn comes at 8 of hearts. This time I slow down and check. The under the gun 1 player bets $75 and the under the gun 2 player folds. We make the call. The river comes the 6 of spades. This time when I check, my opponent once again bets for $200. We only started with about $400, so they're leaving about $100 left behind for us. While annoying, we have top pair, and I make the call. My opponent shows 5-4 of diamonds. They miss their flush draw, and we catch a pretty ambitious bluff. In the next hand, we have pocket queens, and there is an under the gun straddle on for $10. There is an under the gun 1 and under the gun 2 limp, and we raise from the cutoff to $60. Just the under the gun 1 player makes a call. The flop comes pretty bad, ace, king, jack. With 140 in the pot, my opponent checks, and we put out a very small bet of $30. They make the call. The turn comes a 7 of clubs. They check, and we once again put out a very small bet for $40. This is designed to make it so that I can check back the river. My plan is going accordingly, as my opponent just makes a call once again, and the river comes a 3 of hearts. My opponent, however, does something very unexpected and leads for $60 into $280. This is annoying, and I think every option is on the table. We could certainly raise as a bluff. We could just call, we could fold. At this time, I decided to just fold. I don't think this opponent would ever be capable of folding an ace here if we raise. I think they will often just have an ace or a king. If they did this with a jack, then congrats, I got wrecked, and we move on. Let's try again with pocket queens in this next hand, as there is an under the gun and under the gun 1 limp for $5. We raise to $30 under the gun 2. The button, big blind, and the limpers make the call. The flop comes king, jack, 7. While not as bad as last hand, there is once again an overcard to our queens. That said, I don't think this is too bad of a flop in general, so I do start with a bet for $40. The button, big blind, under the gun, and under the gun 1 player all make the call. The turn comes a 10 of clubs, and with $350 in the pot, I'm definitely going to slow down at this point when there's so many callers. I just check. Action checks to the button, who bets $75. The under the gun 1 player makes the call. Now being open-ended, I of course cannot fold here. I make the call. The river comes at 8 of clubs. This time action checks again to the button. He bets $200. The under the gun 1 player makes a call, and we of course are going to fold now. The button shows king 6 off, and the big blind shows king deuce suited. This is truly shaping up to be a pretty good game. In the next hand, I have 10-9 off and decide to get kind of out of line. The hijack and the cutoff limp, and we are on the button, so you know, it's a very good position. I raised to $30. The small blind, hijack, and cutoff all make the call. The flop comes king 4-3 all clubs. Action checks to me, and we didn't open this hand to not c-bet and try to just take it down. I make it $40, but the small blind and hijack make the call. The turn comes a king of spades. At this table, the ranges are just so wide, so when action checks to me, I decide to put in another bet in hopes of taking it down.
I make it half pot $100. This does not work, however, as just the small blind folds and the hijack makes a call. The river comes the ace of clubs. This time my opponent decides to lead, putting us all in for about $600. I can see him show his hand to other players, but obviously we don't have much of a thought here. We make the easy fold. They say good fold and end up showing king 4 of diamonds. Turns out it's not a good idea to try to bluff a full house. Next up, we have a more reasonable hand with ace 10 of clubs. There is an under the gun straddle on for $10, under the gun 1 and under the gun 2 limp for $10. The hijack decides to raise to $40. We are on the cutoff and decide to just make the call. The button, straddle, and limpers all call as well. The flop comes queen 9 8 2 spades. Action checks to the hijack, who decides to bet $45 into 200. This is a very small bet. With a gut shot and 1 over, we decide to make the call, and so does the middle position player. The turn comes the 10 of spades. This time when action gets to the hijack, they decide to check, and we happily check back. The river is very good, the 10 of diamonds. We have backdoored into trips. This time, the hijack decides to bet $90 into about $335. We have about $500 in our stack, and I think the only play here is all in. Middle position player folds, and so does the hijack. Not sure what they had, probably something pretty weak, and we take this one down. Next up, I have pocket kings, and the hijack raises to $25. A large open, the button, and the cutoff call. And we are in the small line and 3-bet to 125. There is no need to go big here, as the original opener only has about $100 effective. As expected, they go all in for about $100, and the other players fold. I just turn over my hand as I'm expecting it to be best pretty often, and the flop comes 10 8 3, turn 4 of hearts, and river, queen of hearts. My opponent said they were hoping for an ace on the river. It didn't come, thankfully, and we scoop. A small one, but still obviously nice to hold. In the next hand, we have pocket threes, and there is a cutoff limp for $5. We are on the button, and we could just limp, but I decided to raise to $25, try to isolate this player who is not so strong. There's not much isolating in this game, as the small blind and cutoff make the call. The flop comes ace 6 4. Action checks to me, and I just put in a c-bet for $35. Just the cutoff makes a call, and the turn comes the queen of hearts. When my opponent checks, I decide I'm basically done with this hand, and I check back. The river comes a deuce of diamonds. The cutoff bets 150 into 145. Now remember when I said I was done with this hand? Well, maybe not, as I start thinking and thinking and thinking. This guy plays so loose, he could just have any 2 cards, he could have a missed straight draw, missed hearts, just absolutely anything. Eventually, I decided to put the biggest hero cape on ever and make the call. Now they did have any 2 cards to my point, as they show 2 pair for queen 4 off. Now this was one of my worst calls ever, but hey, it could have been a genius call if they actually had nothing. It is what it is, we move on. Next up, we have a beauty, ace 5 of spades. The hijack has just come back to the table, paid the blinds that he missed for $7. The low jack limps to $5. The hijack raises to $35, and we 3-bet from the cutoff to $100. The low jack folds, and the hijack makes a call. The flop comes queen 9 9 2 spades. My opponent checks, and with the nut flush draw, we bet $85 into 205. They make the call, and the turn is just what we hoped for, the 4 of spades. We now have the nut flush, of course, and when my opponent checks to me, I bet small $100, and they make the call. The river comes a queen of hearts. This is pretty brutal, especially as my opponent decides to lead for $250. Now any queen or 9 beats us, as it makes a full house. That said, for this price and with the nut flush, I decide to make the call. If they have us beat, congrats, which they do not, as they instantly muck their hand. As you can see, they almost put us all in, so we basically doubled up in this hand. In the next hand, I have king queen off in the small blind. There is an under the gun and low jack limp for $5. The hijack raises to $55. The cutoff makes a call, and we should just be folding here, but with so many loose and crazy players, I tend to widen my range a bit, so I decide to actually call in the small blind. This can sometimes pay off, but it can sometimes also hurt pretty badly. We will see what happens in this hand. The big blind, under the gun, and low jack also make the call, so we are going many ways to the flop that comes 10 7 deuce 2 clubs. There's about $330 in the pot, and everyone actually checks around. The turn comes a 6 of clubs, And once again, everyone checks around. I am having no interest in this hand until the river comes the queen of diamonds. I do recognize I could still be beat here, and this is kind of a dangerous board, so I do decide to just check, and action checks over to the cutoff, who bets $100. I happily toss in a black chip to make the call, and my opponent shows ace queen off. This is why we do not call from the small blind with hands like this. It ends up costing us a lot of money. Gotta say, I'm glad he didn't bet bigger. I probably would have paid off a much bigger bet. It is my turn with ace queen in this next hand, as there is an under the gun raise to $20. The low jack and hijack make the call, and we are in the cutoff and 3-bet to $100. The button cold calls, and that's the only person that calls. The flop comes Jack, Jack, 7. I decide to start with a check, and my opponent bets 125 into 260. With 2 overs and ace high, I am not going anywhere quite yet. I make the call. The turn comes a 5 of clubs. This time when I check, my opponent checks back. The river is the 5 of spades. When everything's said and done, this is not a bad board for our ace high. Jack, Jack, 7, 5, 5. I mean, ace high could actually be good here. I check, but my opponent bets 225. I think it over, but eventually decide to make the fold, and my opponent does end up telling us that he had pocket 10s. This does make sense, as it is the type of hand that people tend to cold call 3-bets with. Next up, I have pocket 9s, and there is a button straddle on for $10. There are a couple early position limps for $10, and the hijack raises to $65. We call in the cutoff, and the limpers also make the call. The flop comes 7, 5, 5, 2 diamonds. Action does not check around, as the under the gun 2 whale ends up leading for $100 into about 200. My opponent could easily just have a 7. They could also have diamonds. They could have who knows what else. The hijack, who was the original opener, ends up folding, and with an overpair, I'm going to make the call. The turn comes a 10 of hearts. This time my opponent checks. When they do this, I think we should often just have the best hand here, so I put in a bet for 150. They end up snap calling, and the river comes a 7 of clubs. This time when they check, as I said, they could have a 7, so we definitely do not want to put in a bet here. I check back. To my surprise, they end up showing king 5 of spades, so they flopped trips. I really couldn't tell you why they wouldn't bet the turn, but hey, it saved us some money apparently. In the next hand, I did not record it as I had just gotten to a new table, but there's an under the gun and under the gun 2 limp for $5. The small blind calls, and we have jack 10 of spades in the big blind and raised to $50. Just the under the gun player makes a call, and the flop comes jack 4 deuce 2 spades. What a glorious flop for us with top pair and a flush draw. I bet about half pot, $55, and my opponent makes a call. The turn comes a 4 of hearts. This time I decide to check. My opponent has an enormous stack in front of them, about $5,000, with $1,000 actually being the max. They end up betting big, something like 150, and we make the call. The river comes a 10 of diamonds. With 2 pair, I do something pretty unconventional and not something I would normally do, and I lead for 250 into 515. To my surprise, my opponent ends up putting us all in for 670 total. I don't really know what to think, but I make the call, and my opponent shows queen 3 of spades. This was a weird hand. Arguably, my bad lead on the river ended up making us the most amount of money, as my opponent probably wouldn't have gone all in if we checked. They probably would have just maybe bet big. The next hand was once again not recorded. I have king queen of diamonds. Under the gun raises to $20, and I 3-bet to $65 in the hijack. My opponent makes a call, and the flop comes queen, queen 7. We flop trips. My opponent checks, and I bet $40, and they make the call. The turn comes the ace of clubs. Once again, they check, and I bet $80. This time, they decide to raise to something like $235. We were only about $400 effective to start this hand, so they end up leaving about $100 behind. With trip queens and the second best kicker, I am just going to put them all in for the remaining $100, and I'm pretty happy about it. They call, and the river comes a 10 of diamonds, and they end up showing ace queen of spades. They flopped better trips and turned a boat. This one was just a cooler. Speaking of coolers, the last hand of the night is here, and it's versus the same opponent as the jack 10 of spades hand. We have ace king off, and there's an early position limp for $5. We raise to $30 on the button. My opponent in the small blind 3-bets to $75. This opponent played queen 4 of spades versus me. I mean, he could have any 2 cards, right? So I am happily going to put in a 4-bet here for $250. They responded this by snap 5 betting and putting us all in for about $1140 total. Versus this guy, I quickly make the call. As the flop is about to come, I ask my opponent what he has, and he says this.
I'm superstitious about it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No problem, dude. Let's see a flop. It comes 9-8-6. Not looking good for me, but there are 2 hearts, and the turn comes the 7 of hearts. With the ace of hearts, we are praying for a good river, and it comes the 5 of hearts.
I have a flush.
Yeah. Fuck me, dude.
Did you have that beat? We were flipping?
No.
Yeah, we were flipping, right? Yeah.
That's not a flip.
Pre-flop, pre-flop.
Pre-flop is not
That's-
a flip. You're way ahead.
What do you mean you're way ahead?
No, it's a classic race.
It's a Queens versus Kings.
Classic dumbass run out too.
We end up doubling up once again off the same opponent who ends up showing pocket queens. This was a classic flip and one we thankfully ended up winning to end the night. We were in for only $600 total, but cashed out for $21.73, which is about a $1,500 profit. A respectable start to the 5-figure score win streak.